Night, Europe, 1941. The battlefield is chaos. Explosions tear the ground apart. Medics sprint through mud, screaming for bandages. Soldiers clutch their wounds, blood pouring faster than hope can keep up. One medic kneels beside a dying man. His only chance? A blood transfusion. But in that moment, in that war, blood is not always there when it's needed. And without it, soldiers fade away. Now, here's the twist. In the middle of this nightmare, a quiet miracle appears. Crates, wooden, ordinary-looking crates, carried across oceans. Inside them, stored blood, life-saving plasma. For the first time in history, blood could travel. For the first time, thousands of men would live to see another sunrise. But here's the mystery. The man behind this miracle, the scientist who solved the impossible, did not become a household name. In fact, most people have never even heard it. Why? Why would the man who revolutionized medicine be pushed into the shadows of history? Fade to black. A single question lingers. To understand this hidden hero, we must first step into a world where saving lives with blood was nearly impossible. America, the 1930s, a nation split in two. Not just by wealth, not just by the Great Depression, but by race. Hospitals were scarce, doctors overworked, and in many places, if you were black, the hospital doors might not even open for you. Now imagine lying on a bed, bleeding. Your life could be saved if only someone could give you blood. But here's the cruel truth. Back then, blood couldn't travel. Once it left the body, the clock started ticking, and too often, the cure slipped away before it could reach the patient. Think about the families, watching helplessly, knowing the solution was right there, in another person's veins. But science hadn't yet found a way to keep it alive. And in the middle of this broken world, a young boy was growing up in Washington, D.C. His name? Charles Drew. He was fast on the track field, sharp in the classroom, a natural leader with a fire in his eyes. But the world around him kept whispering, "Stay in your place." Segregation was everywhere, from the schools he could attend to the jobs he was allowed to dream of. Medicine? That was for others, not for him. Yet Drew refused to listen. He chased knowledge with the same speed he once chased finish lines. Scholarships opened doors, but racism slammed them shut again and again. Still, he pressed forward. He wasn't just learning medicine, he was preparing to challenge a system that told him no. And what he would eventually uncover would rewrite the very way blood was used to save lives. But at this point, he was just a boy with a dream so impossible most would have abandoned it. The question was, how could a young black man, in a nation built to hold him back, possibly change the future of medicine itself? What if the only way forward was to run faster than the doors that kept slamming in your face? That was Charles Drew's reality. Athletics became his first ticket. On the track, he was unstoppable. His speed earned him scholarships, opportunities most young black men in the 1920s could only dream of. But here's the cruel irony. On the field, he was celebrated. Off the field, he was reminded of his place.
Every time he walked into a classroom, the whispers began. "A black man doesn't belong here. He'll never make it." He heard them, but he didn't slow down. Instead, he ran harder, studied longer, pushed further, because deep down he carried a fire bigger than any insult. Medicine, that was his calling. Not medals, not trophies, but healing. And when he entered Columbia University in the 1930s, he stepped into a world few expected him to survive. Columbia's halls were cold, prestigious, unforgiving. Money for research was scarce. Access to labs was guarded. And for Drew, every door was twice as heavy. But still, he pushed. Late nights in sterile labs, stacks of failed experiments, a smell of chemicals that clung to his clothes, and notebooks filled with calculations that went nowhere. Imagine him there, alone, the hum of a single light bulb overhead. Everyone else had gone home, but Drew was still chasing the answer. The mystery of blood preservation, how to stop it from spoiling, how to extend its life long enough to save more than just the patient lying in the next room. His colleagues doubted him. Some dismissed him outright. Why waste money on experiments that will never work? Others simply didn't believe someone like Drew could succeed. But every failure drove him deeper. Every slammed door only sharpened his resolve. He wasn't just experimenting with blood. He was fighting against time itself, against prejudice, against the very idea that his presence in that laboratory was a mistake. And then something shifted. Through trial, through error, through exhaustion that left him nearly broken, Drew began to uncover a truth hidden inside the plasma of blood. A truth that would not only defy his critics, but would one day save soldiers, mothers, children, millions across the globe. Because Charles Drew was about to stumble onto a discovery that would change medicine forever.
But what exactly had he found in those long nights of struggle? And how could one man's breakthrough rewrite the future of war and life itself? Charles Drew had done it. He cracked the code. By separating plasma from whole blood, he discovered it could last. It could travel. It could wait until the moment it was needed most. For the first time in history, blood wasn't chained to the body it came from. It was freedom in a bottle, hope in a glass vial. And just as the world began to notice, war exploded. World War II, an entire planet set on fire. Wounded soldiers flooded hospitals. And suddenly, Drew's discovery wasn't just science, it was survival. The United States and Britain launched massive blood drives. And at the center of it all, they turned to him. Dr. Charles Drew, the man who knew how to move blood across oceans. The man who could turn a battlefield death sentence into a second chance at life. Letters poured in, families writing to blood banks, thanking strangers they would never meet. Soldiers returning home because someone, somewhere, had given a part of themselves. And behind it all, Drew's system, his vision. But then came the twist. A cruel reminder of the world he lived in. Despite his leadership, despite his brilliance, the U.S. military ordered that blood donations be separated by race. White blood, black blood, labeled, divided. And Drew, the very man who had made it all possible, was forced to watch his people's blood stamped as inferior. The man who saved lives
was forced to watch his own people's blood labeled as unworthy. So the question was, would Charles Drew stay silent, swallowing the insult to keep saving lives? Or would he fight back against a system built to silence him? London, 1940. Bombs rain from the sky. Hospitals overflow with the wounded. Doctors scramble, desperate for blood. And then, from across the Atlantic, crates arrive. Wooden boxes stamped with a simple label, "Blood for Britain." Inside, thousands of pints of plasma, liquid hope, carefully prepared, preserved, and shipped using a system designed by one man, Dr. Charles Drew. For the first time in human history, blood flowed across borders, from American donors to British soldiers clinging to life. Each vial, each crate, each transfusion, a testament to Drew's vision. Picture the moment: a soldier on the edge of death, a medic pushing plasma into his veins, and slowly, color returns to his face. Breath steadies, life snatched back from the jaws of war. That was Drew's miracle, and soon the United States adopted it too. Blood banks rose across the nation, factories of survival, fueled by ordinary people giving a part of themselves. But behind the triumph, a battle was boiling inside Drew. Because even as his program saved lives, segregation poisoned it. White blood, black blood, labeled, divided, a lie enforced by the government. And Drew refused to stay silent. He spoke out, loud, public, unapologetic. There is no scientific reason to separate blood by race. His words cut through the hypocrisy like a blade. But in Washington, his defiance sparked outrage. Officials warned him, stay in line, stay quiet. But Charles Drew wasn't built for silence. The louder he became, the harder the pushback. The pressure mounted, until finally, the impossible happened. In the middle of a world war, with soldiers' lives depending on his system, Charles Drew walked away. He resigned, not because he wanted to, but because his principles mattered more than his power. He could not and would not run a program that treated his people's blood as second class. Narrator: in the middle of a world war, Charles Drew walked away from the system he had built because his principles mattered more than power. The music swells. Then sudden silence. Because now the question hangs heavy. What price would he pay for daring to stand against injustice? What happens to a man after he walks away from power? For Charles Drew, the answer was simple. He became a teacher. In lecture halls, not battlefields. With chalk in his hand instead of test tubes. He trained a new generation of black doctors, young men and women who saw in him not just a scientist, but a warrior. They remembered his fire, his refusal to bow, the way he carried himself with both authority and humanity. To them, Drew wasn't just teaching medicine, he was teaching resistance. He was teaching survival. But in 1950, tragedy struck. A car crash. A man only 45 years old, gone in an instant. The medical community was shaken. Students were devastated. A life of brilliance cut short before its time. And then came the rumors, the whispers, that Drew, America's pioneer of blood banks, had died because he was denied a transfusion due to his race. A myth repeated for years. A story born of rage, of grief, of the cruel reality of segregation. The truth, Doctors did everything they could to save him, but his injuries were too severe. Still, the myth lingered, because maybe it felt true in a country where injustice was everywhere. Narrator: in death, even lies tried to erase his truth, yet his impact could not be buried. But here's the haunting question. If Charles Drew saved countless lives, why is his name still a stranger to so many?
A car crash at midnight. A child rushed into an emergency room. Doctors scramble, nurses sprint, monitors scream. The solution comes in a clear plastic bag, a bag filled with blood. Now, picture another scene. A soldier on a battlefield, wounded beyond recognition. A medic kneels, shaking, hands covered in dirt and sweat. The soldier is fading, but then plasma flows into his veins, and life returns. Now shift again. A mother in labor, too much blood lost, her strength slipping away, but a transfusion steadies her heart, and she lives to hold her child. Different people, different times, but the same silent miracle. Every single one of those lives, every drop of blood, every transfusion, every bag of plasma, carries the fingerprint of Charles Drew. He is there in the hospital hallways, in the helicopters that carry medics into disaster zones, in the storage refrigerators of the Red Cross. He is there in silence, unseen, but never absent. And yet, most of us never knew his name. History tried to bury him, prejudice tried to silence him, but his legacy refused to die. Because Charles Drew was more than a scientist. He was proof. Proof that even in a world that calls you less, you can create something that saves more lives than anyone could count. Narrator: every drop of blood stored, every life saved through transfusion, carries Charles Drew's legacy. But here is the truth. History only lives if we remember it. And now you know his name. If this story moved you, don't let it fade. Share it. Tell someone. Because every time his name is spoken, his legacy grows stronger. Charles Drew saved millions, and together we can make sure his story saves something else: memory.